welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a philosophical puzzle, one that's probably kept you up at night, right? I mean, who hasn't wrestled with free will versus foreknowledge at some point?
Oh, yeah, it's a classic for sure. Seems like the more you tug on it, the more tangled it gets.
You got that right. So for this deep dive, we're using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Their entry on foreknowledge and free will is packed with stuff, so we'll try to break it down for you. The main arguments, those clever attempts to make these two ideas play nice.
Well, as a philosopher yourself, you've been around the block with this one, I'm sure. But hey, maybe we can find a new angle or a new wrinkle in this well-worn problem.
Let's hope so. Let's kick things off with that big one, the argument for theological fatalism. This idea that if some being, let's say God, just for fun, if God knew yesterday what you'd do tomorrow, well, your choice doesn't seem so free anymore, does it?
It all comes down to this notion that the past is fixed, right? So God's belief yesterday that you'd say, answer your phone at 9 a.m. tomorrow, that becomes like a set point. And since we're saying God's infallible, the belief has got to be true.
So like a domino effect, huh? God's infallible belief yesterday makes it what they call now necessary, meaning it can't change today, that you will answer that phone tomorrow at 9. Poof, no more free will.
Yeah, it's a line of reasoning that really makes you think. You got to face the music, so to speak, about what a being knowing the future would really mean for us.
So how do we wiggle out of this? Are we stuck in this fatalistic web, or can we actually make choices?
Well, that's where the fun part of philosophy starts. Over the centuries, so many bright minds have been tackling this problem, and they've come up with some really creative solutions. Those who think foreknowledge and free will can work together, they're called compatibilists.
Okay, so let's hear them. How do they try to break free of fate's grip? Where do we even start with this mess?
Well, one approach is to question whether statements about the future are actually true right now. Aristotle, way back when, he suggested that the statement, you will answer the phone tomorrow at 9 a.m., it isn't true until you actually do it.
Oh, interesting. So it's like saying the future is still, up in the air, even for God, because those future events haven't, solidified into truth yet.
That's the idea. If these statements about future stuff, if they don't have a truth value right now, then God can't know them for sure, right? And that kind of weakens the fatalist argument.
Clever, but I can already see a counter-argument brewing here. What about God's knowledge of what will become true? Doesn't that still mean they know the future, even if it's not set in stone yet?
Right, exactly. It's a good objection. It just goes to show how slippery these concepts can be. But don't worry, there are more twists and turns coming up.
Oh, I'm sure of it. What other philosophical rabbit holes do we have to dive into?
Well, another classic response, this one's from Boethius and Aquinas. They came along and said, well, maybe we need to rethink how God relates to time. They argue that God, being outside of time, sees all moments past, present, future, all at once, like one big now.
So instead of foreseeing the future, God just experiences it all at once, like watching a movie where the whole plot is already there, right?
It's a perfect analogy. In this timeless realm, there's no before or after. So this idea of God knowing something before it happens, it just kind of loses its meaning.
Ah, I see. So we escape fate by stepping outside of time itself. Brilliant. But I bet there's a but coming, right?
Well, of course, there's always a but. Philosophers like Linda Zagzebski, they raise some good points. They say even a timeless realm might have its own kind of necessity, its own set-in-stoneness.
So even if God's not bound by our regular linear time, whatever they know in that timeless realm is still fixed. Doesn't that kind of put us back in the same boat?
That's the concern, yeah. Seems escaping time might not be enough to fully break free. But don't worry, there are more fascinating attempts to untangle this knot, and we'll get to those next. All right, so let's jump into William of Occam's work now. He had this fascinating idea about hard and soft facts, even when it comes to the past.
Hard and soft facts. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's that all about?
So Occam said hard facts are purely about the past. No changing them, like the Roman Empire fell, done and dusted. But then there are these soft facts. They're also about the past, but they kind of depend on what happens in the future.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. But how does that apply to given, knowing stuff beforehand?
Well, Occam said God's beliefs about the future, even though they happen in the past, they're soft facts. They rely on what's actually going to happen. So even if God believed yesterday you'd answer the phone at 9 a.m. tomorrow, that belief isn't completely fixed because, well, tomorrow hasn't happened yet.
It's like saying God's belief from yesterday is only as solid as the future it's based on. If the future can wiggle around, so can that past belief. That's a neat way to think about it.
Pretty clever, right? But of course, there are some snags. Some folks aren't sure if this hard-soft distinction is, strong enough. Like, is it a real solution or just philosophical wordplay?
It's always a good question to ask when you're dealing with these big brainy concepts. Always got to keep them honest. So what's the next strategy to tackle this foreknowledge nut?
All right, let's move on to a more modern approach, something called the dependent solution. It says that God knows you'll do something because you'll do it, not the other way around. The order things happen in, that's the key.
So instead of God's belief forcing you to answer the phone, it's your future action, you answering the phone. That explains why God had that belief in the first place. Kind of flips it around, huh?
Exactly. Your choice, made freely, that's where it all starts. God's knowledge is like a result of that choice. A mirror, just reflecting what's already going on.
Okay, I'm getting how this challenges the fatalist view. But how can God have infallible knowledge of something that depends on, a free choice that could go either way?
Well, that gets into some really tricky stuff about how God knows things. Maybe they've got a way of knowing what we would do in any situation without actually taking away our choice.
I feel like we're just dipping our toes in the water here.
Yeah.
What other ideas have folks come up with to make foreknowledge and free will work together?
Oh, we got to talk about Molinism. Luis de Molina, he came up with this idea. He said God has what he called middle knowledge, a special kind of knowledge different from their knowledge of like absolute truths or their own creative will.
Middle knowledge. All right, ready to dive into the deep end. What's that all about?
Imagine God has this huge database, right? It's got all these counterfactuals of freedom, basically statements about what each free being would do in any situation you can think of, like knowing every what-if scenario out there.
So God knows that if, say, someone offered me $1 million to shave my head, I'd probably do it, even though that hasn't actually happened.
That's it. And this middle knowledge, according to Molinism, that's what lets God create the world. They can set things up knowing how free beings would likely react, even though those beings still have their freedom.
Sounds like some cosmic chess game, huh? God makes moves knowing how each player will probably react.
Pretty good analogy. But with Molinism, there are objections too. Some folks say this middle knowledge thing, it undermines the whole idea of free will. If God already knows what I'd do, does that really leave me any real choice?
Yeah, I get that. Seems like even the fanciest theories have trouble making divine foreknowledge and human freedom completely fit.
It's true. But before we get to some other approaches, let's circle back to that idea of the necessity of the past. Linda Zagzebski has an interesting critique. Might change how we look at things.
I'm always up for a good philosophical mind bender. What does Zagzebski say?
She thinks maybe we're getting necessity of the past wrong. Maybe it's not about like some super duper fixed state of being, but just about what we can't change anymore.
So the past is necessary, not because it's stuck in some unchangeable way, but because, well, we can't go back and mess with it. Like what's done is done, not because it's impossible to change it, but because, we just can't.
Exactly. If she's right, then the whole fatalist argument kind of loses its footing. Remember, it leans hard on a very specific kind of necessity, and Zagzebski's making us rethink that.
Okay, now I see how important the definition of necessity is to this whole thing. What other tricks have philosophers used to, fight this idea that God knowing the future locks us in?
Some philosophers, they go even further. They question whether free will even needs this ability to do otherwise, to have different options, and that's where those Frankfurt cases come in.
Frankfurt cases. I've heard those mentioned, but I'm a little fuzzy on them. What are those, and how do they connect all this?
Okay, so picture this. You've got this device. It's implanted in your brain, and it can tell what you're going to do, like what choices you're about to make. And if you're about to pick something that goes against the plan, the plan that's programmed into the device, it kicks in and makes you choose the right thing. But if you happen to choose what they want on your own, well, the device just sits there, doesn't do anything.
So it's like a puppet master, hiding in your head, making sure things go a certain way, even if you try to resist. It's kind of creepy, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. But here's the catch. What if you do pick the right outcome, totally on your own? The device never had to step in. Did you act freely then, even though you technically couldn't have done anything different?
That's a tough one. It feels like you acted freely. I mean, the choice came from you. But at the same time, that option to choose something else, it was gone.
Right. That's the whole point of these Frankfurt cases. They're saying maybe free will isn't about having tons of options every second. Maybe it's about something deeper, like where our choices come from and if they're really ours.
Okay, but how do these these Frankfurt cases connect back to the foreknowledge thing?
Well, they show us a big difference between God knowing the future and those mind control devices. In the Frankfurt case, the device is actively stopping you from picking something else. But God's foreknowledge, at least how most philosophers and theologians see it, it doesn't work like that.
So God's knowledge is more like they're just observing, not like an active force closing doors in other possible worlds.
That's it. God knowing the future doesn't make it happen. It just reflects what's going to go down based on everyone's choices.
All right, I see how the Frankfurt cases might weaken the fatalist side. If it's not God's knowledge that's limiting our choices, then maybe we do have real freedom, even if those choices are, perfectly predictable.
Those thought experiments really make you think, don't they? They force us to look closer at what we think free will is and what it really needs to, actually be free.
So where does this leave us? Did we finally untangle this philosophical mess, or are we still stuck?
Well, we've gone through a bunch of smart attempts to make foreknowledge and free will get along. We talked about necessity, time, how God knows things. But not everyone's convinced these two ideas can really play nice.
Right. There's that other group, the, what do you call them, incompatibilists.
Yeah.
They seem to take a more, let's say, extreme view.
Yeah, they do. They say something's got to give. Either free will is an illusion or God doesn't know everything beforehand. Some of them go for determinism, saying our actions are, set in stone, maybe by a divine plan, and that leaves no room for real freedom.
So we're all just actors following a script then, even if we think we're the ones making choices.
Basically, yeah. But then there's the other side of the incompatibilist coin. You've got folks who are so into free will that they're willing to change their whole idea of God. That's where you get open theism.
Open theism. Isn't that like the idea of a God who's, I don't know, more go with the flow?
Exactly. Open theists say that for free will to be real, God has to, limit their own foreknowledge on purpose. They see God as someone who takes chances, gets surprised by what we do, and reacts to, the whole human story as it unfolds.
It's definitely a different take on the traditional, all-knowing, all-powerful God.
Oh, for sure. And it leads to all sorts of interesting conversations, both theological and philosophical.
It's amazing how one philosophical problem can lead to so many different ideas and interpretations.
This deep dive, I hope it's given you, as a fellow philosopher, a better understanding of just how complex this debate is and how creative those who've tackled it have been.
It has for me, definitely. As we wrap up, I keep thinking about something we didn't really get into.
Well,
What if we just chucked out this idea of temporally asymmetrical necessity? That the past is somehow more set than the future. What would that do to other parts of philosophy?
whoa, that's a good question. Opens up a whole can of worms, philosophically speaking.
Like, how would it affect our ideas about cause and effect? If the future isn't necessarily more, up in the air than the past, would that change how we see events happening and whether we can influence them?
And what about ethics? Would our ideas about responsibility change if we rethought how necessity works over time?
These are big questions, and I feel like we've only just dipped our toes into this whole philosophical ocean. But that's what's so great about philosophy, isn't it?
Yeah.
The more you explore, the more you realize there's always more to find out.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And for you, I know you love these deep dives. I encourage you to keep digging. That Stanford Encyclopedia Philosophy entry on foreknowledge and free will, it's got tons of info and different viewpoints just waiting to be discovered. Who knows, maybe you'll be the one to finally crack this philosophical code.
That's a good thought. Until next deep dive, keep those philosophical wheels turning.